As a search committee representing our congregation, we covenant to
serve our congregation to the best of our ability,
realizing, both as a group and individually,
that we represent the face of our congregation and community
in the ministerial search process.
We will represent our congregation with forthright honesty,
care, compassion, and respect.
follow the rules
and timelines set by the UUA,
Honor a minister's need
to follow the guidelines set by the UUMA.
We will inform and work with the
transitions office and coach
throughout our transitional process,
and understand the need for fairness
and confidentiality
throughout the search process.
We covenant.
We come together today in worship to remind ourselves of the place our faith has in the history of making the world more fair, more just, and more equitable. Morning, I'm Reverend Joe. I want to welcome you to worship this morning as we take a twist on our flower communion. Normally, we gather together and exchange flowers from our backyards or the store, and we put them all into one big, beautiful bouquet on an altar. But since we can't do that this year, we decided instead to look at the life of the Reverend Dr. Norbert Chapek, his work, his message. And so today, it'll be different than years past, but still I want to welcome you into our worship. There is one note I want to say. In the middle of the worship, we're featuring a song by the Cleveland Chamber Choir called 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. It may be hard for some folks to watch that song, so keep an eye out, and just know if you need to skip past it, it's okay. I hope that worship brings you something to lift your spirits, to embolden your soul, to challenge you a little bit, and to make you feel not so alone in the world. So welcome. As new life springs from the ground around us, as the seeds which had lain dormant begin to reach the sun, let our spirits rise. Let our sense of justice rise. Let our compassion rise to meet the needs of our time.
So, here's what I'm thinking about today on our Flower Communion Sunday while we are sadly not together. Norbert Chapek is a very big deal. I knew almost nothing about who he was before I started in our congregation, but Chapek is a UU hero who belongs in conversations with people like Elie Wiesel or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Viktor Frankl, Primo Levi, those individuals who engaged with the rise of German fascism in the 1930s, but thought about it in terms of global justice and the human experience. I'm very sorry to say that Chapek is really understudied, and there's frustratingly little information about him. But what does come to us is a sketch of his life. So he's from the Czech Republic, and he spent his years as a young person bouncing around the different religious communities there in that kind of extraordinary part of the world that actually has a real history of religious diversity and a concern for religious freedom. Interestingly, he ends up in a Czech Baptist church, and he comes to America, to Newark, New Jersey, in the 1920s as a minister. And in that Baptist community, he actually ends up facing 2 heresy cases that are brought against him. So he was clearly on a pathway to something outside of the traditional religious groups that he had known. And it's no surprise that soon after that, he and his wife discovered a Unitarian church, this one in Orange, New Jersey. And there, Chapek's life changes forever. A little side note here. Interestingly, his wife, Maja, she spent her time all in America getting her degree in library science, which is further proof to a little pet theory of mine that there's a deep spiritual connection between librarians and Unitarian Universalists, as many of our own library people at UUCC can attest. Anyway, in 1921, he goes back to Prague, and of course he brings Unitarianism with him. And he and his wife begin to build a fellowship premised on the ideals of liberal religion and a real anti-institutional approach to religious community. Now, what I find hugely fascinating about Chapek leads right into our discussion of Flower Communion, because when he founds this community, he actually learns very quickly from his own congregants that he might have gone a little too far. And they actually are asking him for a venue for kind of spiritual connection and spiritual meaning for the community. And this is where Chapek comes up with this remarkable idea of bringing the spiritual connection to his people through Flower Communion, perhaps the most important UU ritual there is. Now, this is a day where we are supposed to gather together and join with one another in a flourish of colorful flowers, a joyous celebration of being with one another. But as we are all still doing the very important and responsible work of remaining at home, social distancing, it's actually appropriate to think about that other word in the name, communion. For my part, I actually think that the COM words, those co-words, are some of our best ones. Because that COM prefix, it's all about closeness, it's all about intimacy, it's about togetherness, and doing things alongside one another. And this makes words that, when you hear the literal sense of them, they can be so much more powerful than when you just say them casually in a conversation. I think of a word like compassion. Now, you can have compassion on a lot of different things, a lot of different people. It usually has to do with sort of paying attention and having a certain kindness that's offered to somebody other than yourself. But that co-part makes the literal sense of that word something really kind of profound. Because compassion in its literal sense means to suffer alongside someone. Similarly, oh my goodness, a word like companion. Now, normally, companion simply describes somebody who's along for the ride, somebody who you are doing something next to, somebody who's just a travel guest, somebody who you're alongside of. But in its literal sense, a companion is somebody with whom you share bread. Just like those words, the word communion is a loaded term. The root word there comes from a Latin word that means to build up, or to fortify, or protect. So, to be in communion conveys this idea that it's a group that builds up and protects one another. But it also suggests that that kind of building up happens in this continuous reciprocity. So a communion is a people who build one another up, but they also share in the protection and care of one another, always and fundamentally for one another. The flowers, of course, are what we're missing, but they're meant to be a poignant symbol. But the thing that we are is a community, a people who work to build and to care, always for and always alongside one another. And it's worth remembering today, especially of all days, that that is something that no distance or time can change.
In the name of Providence, which implants in the seed the future of the tree, and in the hearts of men and women the longing for people living in human love. In the name of the highest, in whom we move and who makes the mother and father, the brother and sister what they are. In the name of the sages and great religious leaders who sacrificed their lives to hasten the coming of peace and justice, let us renew our resolution, sincerely, to be real brothers and sisters, regardless of any kind of bar which estranges us one from another. In this holy resolution, may we be strengthened, knowing that we are God's family, that one Spirit, the Spirit of love, unites us, and may we endeavor for a more perfect and more joyful life.
Each week, we come together as a people. Together, we share stories, love, aspiration. We also share our bounty in ways that express our religious UU values. May this important ritual of sharing abundance remind us that making our world better is a task best shared.
Following me,
The Reverend Norbert Čapek was the minister of the Unitarian Church in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Čapek converted to Unitarianism along with his wife, the Reverend Maha Čapek, while they were in the United States in the early 1920s. The Čapeks felt called to bring their new faith to their newly liberated homeland after World War I. It was there that Čapek's flower communion and the trouble with the Nazis developed. Every year, in the preparation for the flower communion that he created, I think about Čapek's example and how he spoke for the dignity of those who were considered less than, those that suffered oppression and preached against a corrupt government, all of which led to his death at the hands of the Nazis. So many of my friends are tired. Last week, I reached out to a colleague who happens to be an African-American man in a more orthodox faith than ours, to ask him how he was doing in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. His response was chilling, and I could see the truth of it right away. When I asked if I could be of any help, he said, "Not right now. Unfortunately, I've lived this pain before phones could record it all. I'll work through it. I appreciate you reaching out, though, and showing you care." I know he was not just thinking about his own life, but the lives of his forefathers and the life of his son. What I heard in his voice was generational exhaustion. Not only anger, which of course is justified, not only sadness and grief, not even a question of where's the justice in this, or where is God in this? His sigh and his voice told me everything his words could not yet convey. I thought I could hear in his sighs an echo of Psalm 94, verse 3. "How long, Lord, will the wicked be jubilant?" My friend is not a violent man. He is not a vindictive man. He's a loving, caring man. And yet, in my caring for him, I wonder too, how long? How long will black and brown bodies be injured, lives stolen because some white person feels threatened? How many Karens in a public park calling the police on a black man who is bird watching will it take before that Karen gets arrested and thrown in jail for intimidation? It's not just that one police officer who knelt on the neck of the helpless George Floyd. It is not just the one woman who called the police on Christian Cooper. It is the systemic intimidation of people of color by people who are in power and who are afraid that they're losing their grip on that power. I want to be clear that I'm not anti-police or anti-police officers. I'm anti-overreaction and anti-police violence. It can feel so overwhelming. Last week, 2 days after the death of Mr. Floyd, after yet another response that was completely out of proportion by police, our own Meg Pauken wrote this on Facebook. "I've been feeling so overwhelmed lately about the state of the world, so many fights that need fighting, that I just withdraw. It's too much." And then I see the video of a black man killed by a white police on the street as he screams he can't breathe, and another black man threatened with a call to the police because he asks a white woman to abide by the law. And then I see my privilege, that I have the ability to withdraw from the overwhelm when others have no choice but to live and die within it. Back to the fight, friends. Back to the fight. I was feeling too angry, so pent up, so helpless about this. Yet another death of a black man pleading for his life. Yet another black man begging the police to let him breathe. That I didn't know what to do. Last Monday, we had a vigil at the Building and Shaker, where I asked the crowd that gathered to spend 8 minutes and 46 seconds in stillness, because of course there's never silence. During that 8 minutes and 46 seconds, all I could think of was, what else could this officer have been doing? How much time does it take to take a person who was already handcuffed and put them in the back of a car? You must have been able to do that 4 or 5 times in almost 9 minutes with the help of 3 other officers nearby. It is hard to know what to do. There is so much to do, and action is fraught as we, mostly white liberals, struggle between our desire to be of assistance, our concerns about being patrician, and our need for perfectionism. And yet we know that something must be done. Know that what you do will not be perfect. Know that your actions alone will not be enough. But show up anyway. Find a way to use your light-skinned privilege, your educational privilege, your class privilege to help support our siblings of the African diaspora. Show up to vigils. Show up to protests. Let the dominant system know that you are paying attention. You see what is wrong, and you are there to support those who are in the most danger. Today we are celebrating the Unitarian Universalist ritual of the Flower Communion in a way that we never have before. We are not together physically to bring, gaze upon, and then exchange beautiful flowers, which represent, of course, our beautiful human diversity. Instead, today we are trying to honor the work and legacy of a Unitarian who spoke up to the corrupt government under which he lived. He spoke up about the injustices suffered by the Jews under the Nazi regime. Dr. Čapek used his position, his power, his privilege to illuminate that which was broken in the system in which he was living. It was a dangerous thing to do, but he did it anyway. He died for his beliefs. Now, we don't often talk about martyrdom in Unitarian Universalism. There are other faiths for whom martyrdom is much more common and frankly honored. This is not particularly our way. The Reverend Theodore Parker was such an outspoken advocate for the abolition of slavery that he kept a pistol in his desk in the church in case someone came for him. The Reverend James Reeb was beaten to death while participating in the marches with Dr. King from Selma to Montgomery. Viola Luiso, a mother of 5 from Detroit, was killed in her station wagon helping freedom riders. I'm not advocating martyrdom. I only wish to lift up a few who have died for our beliefs about social equality. There are hundreds of thousands of Universalists, Unitarians, and Unitarian Universalists around the globe in our history who work for social justice every day and return home safely at night. If we are to honor not only the inherent worth and dignity of every person, but the work of our co-religionists, we must push the system in our time to become the societal system we know it could be. We need to ask hard questions of those in charge. We need to demonstrate that the most vulnerable among us are not alone. We must be prepared to utilize our resources in ways that are helpful to the most vulnerable. And we must be willing to be led by those most affected by the ills of our society. That last one might be hard for us. We must be willing to be led by those most affected. We must be willing to do what is asked of us, not debate it. We must be willing to show up when we are asked to, not to hem and haw. We must be willing to accept on faith the stories that we are told, and we must be ready to apply the kind of societal pressure that we can bring to bear onto the problems that affect those we love and those we don't yet love. This is the example set by Reverend Norbert Čapek. The Flower Communion is far more radical than merely exchanging pretty flowers together. Let us honor the ministry of this man by continuing the work in which he was engaged. We can honor Chapek's ministry by also, in our own time, shining a light onto what is wrong in society. People in our faith have been working for centuries, working to move our society toward a place of more radical equality for all. Imperfect, stumbling, and haltingly, but ultimately pushing. We must each take our place in the efforts to make this world better. This cannot wait.
It is worthwhile to live and fight courageously for sacred ideals. Oh, blow ye evil winds into my body's fire. My soul you'll never unravel. Even though disappointed 1,000 times, or fallen in the fight, and everything would worthless seem, I have lived amidst eternity. Be grateful, my soul. My life was worth living. He who has pressed from all sides but remained victorious in spirit is welcomed into the choir of heroes. He who overcame the fetters, giving wing to the mind, is entering into the golden age of the victorious.